years we've been developing a very nice relationship with the Athens County Historical Society. These partnership programs we do enrich the community. It's nice that we can commemorate a very important historical event in the 20th century. Our guest speaker was kind enough to do this program gratis. Most of our programs are through the kind funding of the Friends of the Athens Public Library. They work very hard to sell used books so that our children's, youth, and adult cultural and educational program happens at all. Stephen McLean.
70 years ago today, the Empire of Japan announced after quite a few years of war that they were ready to give in. The surrender was actually announced on August 15, 1945, 70 years ago today. It was signed a few days later on September 2nd, but for all intents and purposes, the war was over on August 15th. The surrender of Japan was not expected in 1945. All indications were that this was not going to be over in August of 1945, that the war could drag on as long as 1947, that no one really expected these weapons to be war-ending. The United States had been waging a pretty brutal war. The losses that they were contending with in the 1940s are losses that today I think we would find not even close to tolerable. Some of the numbers that I'm going to throw, I'll put them in today's terms. The population of the United States in World War II is just almost about 1/2 of what it is today. A lot of these casualty levels, when I tell them to you, I'll give them to you both in 1940s terms and then I'll adjust them for today's population. In 1937, Japan began waging a war in the Pacific, trying to create their version of empire in the Pacific. In 1939 is generally regarded as when World War II begins in proper, when Germany invaded. In the early days of the war, the United States was not a belligerent. Officially, we were neutral. We had nothing in the war. A lot of Americans regarded World War II as another European problem caused by people who really had nothing better to do than declare war on each other and fight each other to the death. Large segments of the American population weren't really all that interested in the war. And they regarded Europe as being sort of far off and, we don't really care anyway. So they weren't all that excited to get into the war. Unofficially, however, the United States was giving massive levels of support, especially to Great Britain. This was an old tradition. Even during World War I, the United States had unofficially aligned itself with Great Britain and France. France is out of World War II fairly quickly. This unofficial partnership would become official though very shortly. As Franklin Roosevelt put it, a date which will live in infamy. No one expected an attack on December 7th that would do massive damage to the U.S. Navy, to Pearl Harbor, and kill nearly 3,000 Americans. On the other hand, the United States was expecting an attack from Germany. The top military brass in the 1940s was fully expecting to get into World War II sooner or later. They always thought that the blow would come from Germany when it fell. Germany actually declared war on the United States first, and the day after, Roosevelt declared war on Germany, bringing the United States into World War II fully. Up until 1944, though, D-Day really, there are relatively light American casualties. The casualty levels would still be high for today's population. Just as a matter of curiosity, does anyone know how many American battle deaths occurred during the entire Iraq War?
10,000?
3,000? 10,000? Okay. The number is actually 4,500 for an entire 8-year war. Now I mentioned that the population today is twice the size of the population in the 1940s, which means that the Battle of Saipan, which cost right around 3,000 American dead and 22,000 Japanese dead, if we adjust it for today's population, would cost the United States 6,000 killed in action for one single battle. And so when I say relatively light casualties here, even the beginning months of the war were not easy for the United States. That battle adjusted for inflation today, as it were, would cost more than an entire war that lasted 8 years. When I use the phrase military losses, what I mean by that is soldiers killed in action, soldiers wounded, soldiers taken prisoner, missing for any reason. Another category which is not often talked about, and that is administrative separation. There are soldiers in World War II who leave the Army not because they've been killed, not because they've been wounded so severely they have to be sent home, not even because they're sick, but because they've been in long enough that, according to statutory limitations, they have to be let out. From the Army's point of view, for manpower concerns, it doesn't make much difference whether you've lost a soldier who's been taken prisoner or because he has to go home. It's still a manpower loss. And so the United States Army is dealing with trying to maintain these levels of manpower in the face of massive battle casualties. And also the fact that some people are going home just because it's time. This is 1944, beginning of the casualty surge. Beginning in 1944, the United States sees a massive upspike in its level of actual battle casualties. And this is already fighting a manpower shortage throughout the war. It's always going to be an uphill struggle for the United States to get as many men into uniform and get them into theater as they can. And throughout the war, Truman is going to constantly ask for more inductions into the draft. Some 2/3 of all American soldiers in World War II will actually be drafted. Well, that's what you have to do to just fill the massive manpower need you have. Before the invasion of France, D-Day, when the United States kind of comes in contact with the German army proper, they are increasing the number of inductions every month, up to 100,000 men per month, just to get them up to strength, just to get them, just to replace losses that they're taking. The invasions of France and Europe and the Mariana Islands and the Pacific, however, mark the beginning of what post-war military analysts would call the casualty surge. At the beginning of the summer of 1944, there is a marked difference in how many men the Army is losing every month. Does anyone have a guess? If we would take the period of, say, June 1944 to the end of the war, when the United States is really bringing as many men to bear as it can into the war, if we were to total up those killed in action, those wounded, and those taken prisoner, how many on average would you say the U.S. Army would be losing in a month?
5,000.
5,000? 50,000?
A month.
That's actually still a low estimate. If we would add both of those numbers together, we would still fall short of the 65,000 men on average per month that the United States is actually losing. That's not counting administrative separations. That is men actually lost due to combat and combat-related causes. One of the sort of overlooked aspects of fighting war is that you lose a lot of people to disease too. You send them overseas and a lot of them end up getting sick. These are actually true battle losses, an average of 65,000 per month. It's a massive number. These are the Mariana Islands. This is the very northern tip of Australia. These are the Philippines. Japan would be further north. These invasions are still taking place kind of further away from Japan. Here, of course, is the battle map for the invasion of France. I think perhaps the most famous invasion in all of history. You know, right through here is the Normandy coast where they're actually invading. That's the main front of the invasion line. As you get closer to the centers of Japan and Germany, it becomes quickly apparent that the war's not getting easier as you go. In fact, it gets harder. I had a history class at one time where we had a kind of a guest speaker come in the lecture who told us, and I'm inclined to believe him, that if you would take the casualty levels for every year in the United States in World War II, they get higher every year. 1944, which is higher, which you might expect because of D-Day. 1945, though, is the highest level. The war gets much uglier and much worse before it gets better. And in fact, some of the most bitter fighting is going to happen in the final months of the war. Which brings us to Okinawa. Here is Japan. Down here are the Mariana Islands. This little place right here is Okinawa. Okinawa is kind of close enough to Japan that you're starting to get the resistance that you might face in Japan, but still far enough away that it's not necessarily quite as ugly as what you're going to face when you invade, say, the area around Tokyo. It is close enough, though, that American military planners start to notice a disturbing trend, and that is, at Saipan, American casualties had been sort of here, and Japanese casualties have been here, relatively speaking. As you get closer, though, they kind of go like this. And by the time you get to Iwo Jima, they're closer, and Okinawa, they're closer. So it's quickly becoming apparent where the closer they get to Tokyo, the more men it is taking. The war is getting a lot uglier. And this isn't just happening in the Pacific either, it's happening in Germany as well. The Red Army actually was the force to take Berlin. It cost them some 80,000 men actually killed in action to do so, to take one city. I'm not convinced that the United States would have sacrificed that many men to take Berlin, because the Red Army has some tactical practices that amount to a meat grinder. That's still a lot of men to lose taking a city in the final months of a war in a country that's supposedly collapsing. From the perspective of American military planners, there's not a lot of reason to expect that the closer you get to Tokyo, that the situation is going to be any cheerier. Okinawa also sees the beginnings of kamikaze attacks. These are the attacks when Japanese pilots would basically transform their plane into a flying bomb and attack American ships. Now, that's problematic for American military planners on a couple of levels. One is that you're losing ships and you're losing men. Another is that it's terrifying to look up and see a plane barreling down at you that you're not sure you can shoot out of the sky. And even if you do shoot it, say you do manage to shoot it down, its trajectory might still bring it down onto the ship. There are accounts of battleships being sunk by kamikaze attacks. There are accounts of battleships surviving kamikaze attacks, albeit with severe damage. However, those are heavily armored ships. Most men who are being shipped overseas at this time are actually being literally shipped. They're being put on ships and sailed halfway around the world. These troop transports are vulnerable. They're not as heavily armed as a battleship. And so it's one thing for a kamikaze plane to attack a battleship. It's another thing to attack a troop transport, which might have thousands of Americans on board. If they sink that in the open seas, you're going to lose it with all hands. Which means already, before you even mount an invasion, where you have to take the beach and the sort of full-scale onslaught that you might see in a movie like Saving Private Ryan, you're going to have to contend with massive losses, possibly on the open sea, before you've even seen the first Japanese soldier. The longer you go in a war, the easier it is to say, well, we only have to fight a little bit longer. The longer you fight, the worse it's going to get in Japan. I talked a little bit about how those casualties would look to the American people. If we suffered the same level of casualties today, that we necessarily wouldn't be very happy about it. As the war goes on, there are a lot of people whose sons, whose fathers, whose husbands, whose brothers are in uniform halfway around the world. A lot of those men aren't coming home, and a lot of people aren't happy about it. U.S. Marines lost quite a few men taking the island of Tarawa. The mother of one of the soldiers killed actually wrote to General MacArthur and laid the blame squarely at his feet and told him that she would never forgive him for killing her son. Growing war weariness that Roosevelt and later Truman are dealing with. So much so that after Germany falls, the American people look at a situation where Germany's done. The war's over, right? Except it's not. That doesn't necessarily matter in the face of political pressure, and so Truman is basically forced to allow what amounts to a partial demobilization. A lot of men who would otherwise be going to Japan to invade are instead being sent home because they're out on points. They've been in long enough, they've been in enough battles, they've seen enough action in active combat theaters that they have to go home according to the new rules. After May of 1945, the war becomes a one-front war. The war is going to get a lot uglier the closer you get to Japan. It's also true that you're going to need a lot of men to invade Japan at the exact same time when you're sending a lot of them home. How do you get enough men into uniform? How do you replace the ones you're going to lose? For Truman, these are not just hypothetical scenarios. Truman was an artillery officer in World War I, and so he has frontline experience that a lot of presidents don't. America's main contribution to World War I was the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, which was their sort of first full-scale slugfest with the German army. Truman was an artillery officer whose unit had to pull their guns forward under fire to keep firing at the Germans. During particularly vicious parts of the battle, it was not unusual for them to take 50% frontline casualties. That's a high level of casualties. And so Truman is looking at a situation where it's quickly shaping up to look like his own experience in the Meuse-Argonne writ large. It's one thing to look at a piece of paper and say, we've got, say, 5 million men committed to the fight. We may lose up to 200,000 of them in frontline conditions. It's another to actually understand what that does. Truman has seen enough to know what will actually happen. Planning for Operation Downfall, which is the code name for the invasion of Japan, goes on sort of unabated. Everyone kind of accepted that Japan is going to have to be invaded. That's a paradigm that the U.S. military has had throughout World War II. Even in the early days of the war in 1942, Eisenhower is saying to his aides, if we have to invade France, then we have to invade Germany. If we have to invade on a broad front, we have to actually set foot on German soil to win this war. And commanders in the Pacific are saying much the same about Japan. If you want to defeat Japan, you might be able to do it by strategic bombing if you can get close enough, but ultimately what is going to happen is American soldiers are going to have to set foot on Japanese soil and take it by force. That's what MacArthur himself is saying. That's what his advisors are saying. That's what virtually everyone in the American military establishment is saying. There are those who think that strategic bombing, the sort of wholesale bombing of cities, might bring it to an earlier end. Eventually, you have to invade. It's going to get ugly. Operation Downfall had two aspects. One was Operation Olympic, which would take place in the southernmost island here, Kyushu. I think the tentative launch date was sometime in October of 1945. The battle plan here was to invade these beaches along the southern end to establish a supply line to get forward air bases so you can bomb Japanese cities further up the Japanese mainland, the prelude to what would be the invasion of Japan. D-Day was a massive operation. Olympic alone would have dwarfed it. Downfall altogether would have dwarfed it. Most of the United States Navy is fighting in the Pacific, of course. They don't have to contend with the splitting of resources to keep Germany pacified. Germany largely has given up. There's scattered fighting still going on, but the United States is able to bring the full bear of its might upon Japan. What is intended to happen on the island of Kyushu here is a massive naval bombardment. Basically, you fire everything you can at the island and hope that you hit as many people as you can. There's a problem with that, though, in that they tried the same thing on Iwo Jima with notably disastrous results. They bombed the island so thoroughly and shelled it so thoroughly that when they invaded, not a single tree was left standing on the entire island. They invaded Iwo Jima and advanced a little bit inland to find no resistance, and so they had hoped, maybe we've already killed everyone on the island. And then they found out that Japanese defenders had actually holed up in caves. And then Iwo Jima became sort of the prolifically brutal slugfest that it eventually turned into. It wasn't pretty. And so everyone in 1945 is looking back at Iwo Jima and saying, we have to bombard them to soften them up, but this is going to be ugly. In the following spring of 1946, the plan was for Operation Cornet. There's a plain around Tokyo called the Kanto Plain. The plan was that American forces would invade that area to kind of take Tokyo and subdue Japan. If you look at just the areas that they're planning to invade here, this is not necessarily most of Japan, and they're already anticipating high casualties. Truman asked different people, and so he got different casualty estimates. MacArthur gave him an estimate of 46,000 dead for the entire operation. The 46,000 number was for the first 90 days of the invasion. Other numbers go as high as 1 million actually dead. I think that's a bit high. I've heard some numbers from 400,000 to 800,000 Americans actually killed in taking Japan. Ultimately, what matters about those numbers is not which one would have been most accurate. Ultimately, we can't know. We didn't invade Japan. Truman heard those numbers and gave credence to at least some of them. And he was looking at the number of 400 to 800,000 and thought maybe this was at least a credible number. So much so that the ordering of Purple Heart, the printing of Purple Hearts was ordered. Before the end of the war, some 500,000 Purple Hearts would be printed in preparation for this event. They weren't used because we didn't invade. But to date, not all of those Purple Hearts have been handed out. As late as 2011, some 120,000 of them were still in stockpiles. There were enough of them that we invaded in Afghanistan. Combat teams could keep them on hand to award them to wounded soldiers at the moment of wounding, that is. Truman heard high casualty level. That's a big answer of why he chose to drop the atomic bomb. The dropping of the atomic bombs, I think there's two questions there: why and how. How many men are you going to lose? How do you avoid losing that many men? Because the United States, historically speaking, doesn't like to lose a lot of people in war. In Iraq, which cost 4,500 Americans over the course of the war, which is not to say that that's an insignificant number. Even that number is enough to encourage sort of widespread resentment of the administration that led us into that war. World War II, before the end, is going to cost the United States 400,000 dead killed in action. In today's population, it will be 800,000. That's a lot of people, and Truman is aware that the more Americans who come home dead, the more resentment he's having to face. The more tired people are going to get of the war. They've already forced a partial demobilization of the war that Truman viewed as the middle of the war, not the end. He didn't expect it to end in August of 1945. he's not expecting the war to end in 1945. So part of it is he's looking at a situation where he may be forced to negotiate terms with Japan, which is something that they're very much against. Even in the early days of the war, the Allies had insisted on unconditional surrender. The Axis must submit unconditionally to Allied control. No one at the top echelons of control is willing to negotiate terms with Japan. Part of that is anger, too. Part of that is the idea that the Japanese brought this upon themselves. Pearl Harbor still stands tall in American memory as a sort of act of treachery that must not go unpunished. How can Truman drop the atomic bomb? What does it take mentally to give an order that wipes out 80,000 people? Part of the answer is that it's been happening basically since the beginning of the war. That by 1945 it's become very easy for Truman to do that because it's not really anything different than what he's been doing so far. I think Roosevelt and Truman are following basically the same policy. What is strategic bombing? Early in the war, there was a hope among military planners that basically if you put a lot of bombers into the sky and sent them at enemy targets, especially industrial targets, and bombed them into rubble, and then bombed the rubble again, that you could end the war. That the shock and awe before shock and awe was really a thing. I think that the post-war analysis will show that strategic bombing on its own can't win a war. Everyone in World War II was still kind of hoping that it did, though. And it was an important aspect of invasions. The French government in exile, headed up by de Gaulle in London, went to Eisenhower because within certain levels, it's common knowledge that the United States is planning to invade France. And on some level, they have to because that's where the Germans are, and because you don't want to invade where the Germans aren't. De Gaulle goes to Eisenhower and he says, Eisenhower, we may have a slight problem here. And he says, oh really, how so? He said, well, I know you're planning on invading France. And Eisenhower said, well, well spotted, that's exactly what we're planning to do. And he said, yeah, and you're probably planning on bombing railway yards too, aren't you? And he said, well, yeah, considering everything is moved by rail in France, that's what we're going to have to do, impede the supply of German units. And de Gaulle said, well, then we have a problem. In that most of those railway yards are staffed by French workers who are not Germans, who are, statistically speaking, most of them not Nazis, who may be, in fact, very unhappy with the Nazi regime. And de Gaulle says, if you carry out these bombings, you're going to kill a lot of French civilians. And Eisenhower's response is kind of more callous than you might expect. He said, well, that's a real shame. But the fact is they're working there, we're going to bomb those yards, and we're going to kill all of them. Or at least as many as we can. And they did. Preliminary estimates had indicated that as many as 80,000 French civilians would be killed. Ultimately, the number was fairly lower, but the fact is that Americans were willing to kill civilians of an ostensibly friendly country to kill Germans. But if they're willing to levy that kind of destruction in France, what do you think they're going to be willing to do to Germany or to Japan? And I think Japan is the focus of a lot more anger than is Germany in 1945. Just as a sort of thought experiment, these are 4 cities in World War II, all of them subjected to strategic bombing by airplane. I'll give you their names. One of them is Nuremberg, one of them is Berlin, one of them is Hiroshima, and one of them is Tokyo. Which one is which?
Hiroshima bottom left.
Yeah.
Tokyo bottom right.
Yeah.
Then Nuremberg and what was the other one? Nuremberg and
Berlin.
Berlin.
Yeah. Are you ready for the answers?
Yes.
Yeah, we do.
Top left is Berlin. Top right is Nuremberg.
Yeah.
Or bottom left is Tokyo. Bottom right is Hiroshima. My point here is not to draw some sort of moral equivalency between the atom bomb and firebombing. Quite frankly, they're both pretty inhuman. This is the sort of devastation that American planners were willing to levy against cities. The atom bomb did not present all that much of a divergence between from what they were already doing. The atom bomb is something new and something different, something far worse, I think is right. I also think that it's a post-war realization. Very few people were thinking that Hiroshima 70 years later would still be subjected to heightened radiation levels. I think to them, this was a tool that allowed you to levy this kind of devastation at a city, but instead of taking 8 hours and an entire fleet of planes full of firebombs to accomplish this, you can accomplish this in a second with one bomb dropped by a team of 3 planes. For the purposes of American military planning, that's a wonderful thing. One of the highest mortality rates of the American armed forces is the Army Air Force, which was responsible for carrying this out. Because if it takes 200 planes to do this and you lose, say, a quarter of them shot down, you've lost 50 planes, which are expensive, hard to produce. You've also lost their crews, which is in some ways more valuable because you're losing experience. You're losing actual people too. But if you can do this with no American losses, and you can target the city and kill 80,000 Japanese, then you've brought the casualty level from here back to here, which if you're Truman is where it belongs. That's another site in Berlin. You can see it's heavily damaged. If you would take all of the rubble in Germany, divide it up into 7 equal piles, one of those piles would be the rubble taken from Berlin alone. Massive amounts of destruction levied at one city. This is Tokyo, following a firebombing raid that killed 100,000 people in one night. In one night, the death toll of the Tokyo bombing surpassed the immediate death toll of Hiroshima. In the long run, I think Hiroshima would kill more due to excess cancers, radiation, long-term death that results. The atom bomb, the way it's used in the final days of the war, is really best seen as an extension of American strategy. The United States is willing to levy whatever destruction it can muster against its enemies to get the job done, to save as many of its own people as it can. And once you make that mental break to the idea that you can bomb basically civilian population centers with firebombing, bringing them to almost total ruin, I think the thought that you've got a new weapon that can do that much more easily with much less of your own men lost, I think it's a lot easier to make that decision than it would be in, say, 1939 when you're contemplating the deaths of 80,000 people just like that. In the final days of the war, the atom bomb made a transition from a strategic weapon to a tactical weapon. Targeting cities serves a strategic purpose. It is designed to end the war. If you can destroy enough cities, Japan will end the war. The operational level is how you win a war, or how you win a battle. The strategic level is how you win a war. The atom bomb goes from a strategic weapon to a tactical weapon in that after Nagasaki, George Marshall makes a recommendation to Truman that the atom bomb not be used against Japanese cities anymore, and not because it's too destructive. Marshall's reasoning is that the United States Air Force, the Army Air Forces at the time, have perfectly functional B-29s with perfectly functional firebombs that have proven quite effective. So why do you need to use the massively expensive atom bomb that takes a lot of time to produce against population centers that you can destroy through other means? Well, he's not proposing just putting them into a warehouse or anything. He wants to use it. He wants to use it on massed formations of Japanese troops defending beaches. Basically, when American boys hit the beach, B-29s are going to drop atom bombs on Japanese formations just inland. Take out as many of them as they can to soften up the beach for the American invasion. The atom bomb is seen by Truman as just another tool in the war to win the war. Put a poison gas there because it wasn't used in World War II except maybe in limited circumstances. In a war that saw so many other no-holds-barred engagements, no major belligerent was willing to use poison gas, even Nazi Germany, to the point where Hitler was willing even to overlook isolated uses of poison gas in the hope that it wouldn't devolve into World War I again. The United States was so desperate in the end of the war to give their own troops the best chance they could, they were willing even to levy poison gas against the Japanese. They didn't do it. I'm not convinced that they actually would have, because poison gas scares people in a way that bullets seem not to. In World War I, for example, some 60% of all combat deaths are actually caused by artillery. But a lot of the sort of remembrance of the war comes back to poison gas. And I think that it occupies a psychological part of war making that otherwise conventional means just don't. But there were people in American military command who were saying we should at least consider the use of poison gas against Japanese cities. The war ended before they were really forced to come to a decision with that, but they did at least consider it. To sum up, if you had asked me, what really are the factors that led Truman to dropping the bomb? I really think it comes down to the why and the how. The mechanical details of how are you supplying an army? How many men are you losing? Is war weariness going to force you out of the war early? Because it might. The how, I think, really is just this, embracing total war. Basically, the strategic bombing of population centers. Disappearance of the line between combatant and civilian the further the war goes on. The idea that late in the war that was sort of voiced by one American military commander who said there are no Japanese civilians. The line between civilian and combatant doesn't really matter all that much anymore. I think that is how you get the atom bomb used. That's it. Any questions?
Scientists who created the atom bomb didn't know about the radiation. When you're saying Marshall was going to use the atom bomb and then put American troops in the area where the radiation was present,
Yep.
so they didn't warn the politicians.
No. Originally, because the war ended early, the plans are sort of still half-formed and all that. You know, there are some plans that call for an atomic strike on Tokyo and then for American troops to march right through. You know, so you can imagine what that would have looked like in the post-war period when you've got millions of men with cancer in the 50s. Millions of excess cancers, you know, not just a background rate. So Kyushu right here, these beaches here. What Marshall was advocating was for atomic strikes in some of these beaches that Americans would be occupying very soon after.
Common thought is that the dropping of the atomic bomb is what ended the war. What about it, since you're saying that the Americans had a much longer distance that they thought the war would end, what brought about the Japanese to surrender when they did? Was it those two bombs, or was it a cumulative process because you're showing what the firebombs did to Tokyo too?
The atomic bombs are shocking weapons. You know, after Hiroshima is bombed, basically for 16 hours, the Japanese military command is kind of scrambling, wondering what happened. You know, we can't get in contact with anyone from Hiroshima. What went on over there? And then they find out. I think part of it also is that they are facing an invasion, not just from the American army, but also from the Red Army. Sometime late in the war, you know, in accordance with Allied agreements, the Soviet Union declared war on the United States and rolled a massive Japanese army out of Manchuria, which is where we get the division of Korea from. Japanese military planners are looking at the situation where for the first time, the United States can really destroy their cities one by one, make Japan a wasteland without ever necessarily setting a foot on its land. If you can't even face them on the ground, how do you face them?
Dropping the Nagasaki bomb 3 days later as opposed to, say, 2 weeks later.
The United States, even at this time, did not have a massive supply of atomic weapons. This is not the 1960s. You know, these are really rare, really precious weapons. At the time when the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, that was the last one we had. Another one would have been ready in a couple of weeks or so to drop on Tokyo, but the timing was actually carefully orchestrated. Military command was looking at a situation where you have 2 bombs. But you don't necessarily want to tip your hand and tell the Japanese that you only have 2 bombs because you want them to expect that you have 1,000, right? And so they drop one 3 days later, basically to give the appearance that we don't care how many we use, we've got plenty.
So Truman was never asked, or was never forthright on what his reasons were?
I didn't come across any statement that says, that Truman said, this is why I dropped the bomb. I think that the statement Truman made to his military advisors might sum it up as neatly as anything else. After Okinawa, they were planning Operation Downfall, and Truman said, how do we prevent Okinawa from one end of Japan to the other? How do we avoid that prolonged slugfest? Okinawa lasted far longer than anyone expected it to, except the Japanese. You know, the Americans thought, you know, well, we'll take this island, it'll be quick, you know, this will be easy. And it wasn't. The Japanese had different ideas about that.
I've heard speculation the bomb was used as a demonstration to the Russians that we had this weapon. Have you heard anything?
I have, and I'll put it this way, I think it's a bit wrong-headed. I think it's easy to say, following the event, that the United States and the Soviet Union were always going to be at each other's throats. The fact is, in 1944, Joseph Stalin was our best friend. There was tension between Churchill and Roosevelt because Churchill thought that Roosevelt's worst tendency was to give Stalin everything he wanted. Because as far as Roosevelt is concerned, the fact that the Soviets are facing 75 to 80% of German strength in Europe. If we can fight World War II to the last Russian, why do we need to fight to the last American? The United States military command is deeply invested in making our relationship with the Soviet Union work. It's only after the war that you see the start of the cooling that starts to develop into the Cold War. I think the idea that the bomb was used as a demonstration against Russia, I'm not convinced. And maybe Truman wasn't as receptive to the Soviet Union as was Roosevelt. And it doesn't make much sense to me, personally.
How many atomic bombs were available?
Nagasaki was our second and final bomb in the inventory at that time. Around 2 weeks later, there would have been the third one. Around August 17th, I believe, was the slated timeline for the third one to become available for an atomic strike on Tokyo. By the time of the 1st of October 1945, when Olympic was scheduled to commence, it's estimated they would have had as many as 12 in their arsenal. Not enough that you really have a comfortable surplus. But
I don't understand why they dropped the second bomb in just 3 days. There was hardly enough time for the Japanese to contemplate what had just happened. Why didn't they wait for a week or 2?
I think to give the appearance that they had more bombs than they really did. Kind of like a bluffing. If you have 10 bombs, then you might expect just to throw them one after the other, right? And so if you want to give the appearance of having, say, 10 bombs when you only have 2, if you throw one and then throw another one, it looks like you've got more than you really have. I think that's just a tactic of trying to shock the Japanese into surrender more quickly.
Was there any information that you found about any contemplation of demonstrating the bomb somewhere else?
From the perspective of American military planners, the fact that the bomb would kill lots of Japanese is a feature. From the perspective of Truman, the fact that this bomb is going to be massively destructive to a Japanese city, I think he has very few qualms about that. I think they could have demonstrated it somewhere else. I don't think that they were particularly inclined to do so.
You might be familiar with Curtis LeMay's statement after the war, that supposedly there were 1 million Japanese soldiers on the mainland, the main island, in anticipation of an invasion. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And where did all those people come from after all the deaths that they went through throughout the war?
It's kind of one thing to inflict massive casualties on an enemy, it's another thing to annihilate them completely. Isolated pockets of Japanese soldiers are being basically annihilated at these islands.
Mm-hmm.
There are also massive numbers of Japanese troops. It's also worth noting that Japan is not just fighting in the Pacific, they're fighting in China.
Right.
They're fighting in Korea as well. And a lot of troops are being pulled from those areas to fight too.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of soldiers still in Japan too. Even this late in the war, Japan has not mobilized all of its soldiers into the front, out into the war. So the number of 1 million Japanese soldiers under arms, I think, is actually pretty accurate. How many of the enemy are you going to have to face, I think, is a number that kind of haunted American military planners, and it's not exactly clear cut because on one hand, you might be facing Japanese soldiers. On the other hand, there is at least a segment of Japanese government that is willing to arm civilians as well. Send them basically into the field with, in some cases, no more than explosives, and told, kill at least 1 Yankee. Whether that would have happened, again, it's speculation. It didn't, and so we can't know whether it would have. As far as the number of 1 million, I think it's a credible estimate. I also think it might be a conservative one, too.
How is it that American military intelligence did apparently not know that a Japanese carrier group is within striking distance of Pearl Harbor? I don't know the extent of the fleet that was there, but at least a carrier group. And I have heard speculation that even that Roosevelt actually wanted us in the war, and this would do it?
Yes and no. Roosevelt did want in the war. He wanted in the war against Germany.
Yeah.
And they weren't really expecting a strike from Japan. As far as intel goes, I don't really have any experience collecting intelligence. My sense is that you never really get a slam dunk with intelligence. You don't look at the sort of rumors and everything that's going on and you get this sense, yes, they're going to hit us at 8 o'clock tomorrow, right here. I mean, the ocean is pretty big. It would be plausible that they could miss. I think it's probably best explained by the fact that everyone was focused on the strike that they thought would be coming from Germany and not from Japan. Pearl Harbor is the strike that brings us into the war. And even after that, Roosevelt and his military staff sit down and they say, we all know who the real enemy is here. We know who we have to fight first. And it's not Japan, it's Germany. Germany is always regarded as the most dangerous enemy, even though they were the ones who brought us into the war. They declared war on us 4 years later, making the decision incredibly easy to whether we should fight them. Germany is sort of always regarded as the real existential threat to America and peace. The rumors that Roosevelt wanted to strike on Pearl Harbor, they rest on a somewhat flawed understanding of politics in general and in the 1940s. If Truman had really been expecting a strike at Pearl Harbor and did nothing, I think he would have either sent the battleships out to sea or he would have brought our own carrier groups home. Neither of those things happened. You know, a lot of our battleships that were damaged even severely were repaired shortly after the war, allowing us to come back into the war. Our carriers, which are perhaps the most important strategically asset we've got, escaped because they're out on the open sea. I don't think Truman knew that an attack was coming. The Japanese had sent a coded transmission basically amounting to a declaration of war. It wasn't decoded in time. I don't remember the exact text of the message, but basically it is, we don't like you very much and we're now at war. And I think Roosevelt's response to that was, really? You don't say.
Right, I mean, it's a pretty crass thought to think that anybody would be willing to sacrifice 3,000 people to get us into the war.
Well, on the other hand, too, but before the end of the war, 400,000 Americans would be sacrificed to win the war.
Sure.
As one who has lived through this period of time, in fact, I was aboard a destroyer, San Pedro, California, when the bomb was dropped. We were heading out. I found your presentation very, very interesting. I have just finished reading recently David McCullough's book on Truman, his biography. And one of the things that struck me was at Yalta, where Truman and Stalin and Churchill were gathered. Stalin had committed Russia to the invasion of Japan.
Yeah.
And when Truman went into that conference at Yalta, he felt that he could strike a deal with Stalin. He felt he could deal with him. But he came away from that realizing that the U.S. needed to get into Japan and drop that bomb before Russia made its move. And they were dealing with a matter, I think, of just a very few weeks, because they were, the U.S. was, I think, pretty knowledgeable about when Russia was going to make its move. And so that played an important part, I think, in Truman pushing that forward as quickly as he could.
Yeah, I think you're very spot on with that. The war against Germany has always been sort of a joint effort. I mentioned that Roosevelt was perfectly willing to fight the Nazis right to the last Russian. When it came to Japan, however, in the early days, it was much more of a joint effort than it would be later in the war. The United States in the early days had massive support from Australia. Later in the war, though, when the United States sort of got its bearings and sort of really started firing up the government that it would become, the Australian Army was relegated to a really humiliating role. They weren't allowed to support them. And even Britain, sort of our closest ally in the entire war, Truman didn't really like the idea of British soldiers invading Japan alongside American soldiers. I think the idea was that American soldiers should be carrying out the invasion. They wanted to be the ones to go there. The competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. They really wanted to work together, but I also think the Americans really wanted to take Japan for themselves. I think it was personal in a way that the war against Germany wasn't.
Happy birthday, baby.
Hey, isn't it about time for Buttercup's birthday?
Oh, what's this game? You want me to play this? Oh, there's a ball. do you play?
Oh, what a peaceful day.
Why don't you play, Purr? Come on. Here, throw the ball to you. Come on, this is fun.
Would you settle down, you stupid
Look at this paper. Look at that. Go get it. Hey, where'd it go? Oh, I'm thirsty. Come on,
What's
Purr.
that silly thing?
Come on, play.
I'm not going to play, as you say.
Come on, this is a party. We're supposed to have fun.
Oh, how ridiculous.
Chase that paper. There's the ball.
I don't care. My goodness, how childish.
It's your turn. All right, I'll get it. There we go. I got it. Yeah, what a game. What a party. Yeah. Boy, I'm having fun. Where'd it go? Go get it, Purr.
No, not on your life.
You're no fun, Purr.
Oh, will somebody let me in? I come for the party. I have a present. Will somebody let me in, please? Please open the door. Buttercup, hello. Can I come in?
Oh, did you want to come in? Well, I guess.
Oh, will you please let me in? I'm coming for the party. Thank you.
All right.
Well, should I come in now, or should I just wait?
Well, I don't know. It's not that good a party. Oh, come on.
Oh, here.
You want to play ball?
I'll get that ball. I'll show you how to play. Well, there it is.
Isn't this fun?
Oh, where's the ball? There it is. Yeah, I'll get it now.
Yeah, that's it. Now keep the ball going. Come on.
What's that? Ooh, there's the ball. This thing hanging in my face. Ooh, there it is.
Hey, throw it to me. Oh, there's the paper. Oh, I can decide which game to play. Boy, what a party, huh?
How disgraceful. You boys are acting like children.
Oh, come on, Purr. Why can't you play with us?
I need to bathe. Oh, stop, I don't want to play.
I'll be a good sport.
What did I just say? Thank you. What now?
Hey, where's that ball?
Go get it. It's your serve.
There it is.
Come on. Serve it to me. There you go.
Uh-oh. Where'd it go?
You lose it?
I knew I saw it. Where'd it go? Did you see it?
Well, it's over there.
Oh, there it is. Hey, what's this? You want to play this?
Yeah.
How do you play this?
Well,
Paper.
oh, there's a mouse. Want to play mouse? Hey, I'm getting kind of hungry. I think we could have some popcorn now.
Hey, look, hey, what do we got?
Oh,
I'm
food.
hungry.
How scrumptious.
Oh, boy, cheese-flavored
This is
popcorn. That's my
What's
favorite.
this? Yuck.
Oh, I love it.
Oh,
I don't like that.
I like to
pretty
move it
good.
over to the floor and eat it, though.
It's pretty good.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's got a lot of salt.
Chewy and quite large, but it's good.
Yeah, that's just what I wanted for my party.
Have any more snacks? That's not very good.
Oh, come on, Pumpkin, don't be so picky.
Oh, let's play games some more.
Hold on, we're eating now.
Where'd it go? Come on, everybody.
Play with you?
Where'd it go? I'll wait for it. Maybe it'll come out if I wait. Hey, what was that? Oh, hey, there it is. Got it. Oh.
Boy, this popcorn.
Oh, this is quite chewy.
That's
That's
wonderful.
a nice taste.
This is just the beginning of the food.
Yeah, we'll get some better food. I mean, not very good.
I didn't know you didn't like it, Pumpkin. I wouldn't have. Oh, birthday cake. Well, I guess I'll make a wish. I guess I'll wish for some mice and maybe some catnip. I'll blow it out. There we go.
What's in this anyway? Tastes good.
You like my mouse? Hey, you're sure enjoying my mouse.
Wish I had one of these.
How disgraceful, you boys.
You having fun, Pumpkin?
Yeah. I'm playing with the mouse now. Ew, it tastes horrible.
Well, I got my crown on. I guess I'll...
Oh, get this off my head.
Come on, Pert. We're gonna unwrap
My
presents.
goodness.
Come
This
over
is
here.
ridiculous.
Well, you gotta wear a hat at a party. Come on.
Oh, I do not.
Well, let's see. What do we got? Come on, Pumpkin.
Oh, I don't want that.
Well, just come over here. Now, let's see. Which one shall I unwrap first?
Can I open some?
No, it's my party. Come on
I'll
now.
open the big one here.
No. Now, I'm gonna open this one from you, Pumpkin. What is it?
Oh, I'm not gonna tell you.
Looks like it's something nice. Oh. Oh, it's a can of
Now, I can help you with that.
9 lives. Hey, maybe we'll get into this
Hey,
later.
I can help you with that.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Pumpkin. That's a nice present. I like that. Let's see. This one's from Bird. I don't know what this is. What could it be? What could it be? Oh, it's like a jar. Why, it's catnip. Oh boy, we're gonna have fun with this. We'll try some later. You want to? Catnip is great.
Hey, I want to open that.
Oh, who's this from? Is this from you, Pumpkin? This is a big one. I wonder what it is. Oh, it smells interesting. What in the world? Oh, look at that. A big pillow with a cat on it. Wasn't that nice? Well, thank you, everybody. You sure made a nice birthday party for me.
Boy, I love this catnip. Oh, it's
Hey.
great.
Hey,
Ooh.
you into my catnip?
Ooh, I love this.
Wait a minute. Let me have some. Hey, hey, you get out of there. You're getting too wild.
Oh, I love this stuff.
I don't want any catnip.
Come on, Purr, try a little bit.
No.
Pretty good. was raised
Bad for you, don't you know?
in Meigs County.
Riddle.
Oh, look, it's time for
But this does look good.
Nine Lives cake. Oh, boy.
Oh, this is good. I like this.
Oh, what a
Yes,
great
doesn't it
cake.
look so good?
Cake made out of cat food.
What kind of cat food is this? It's very good.
9 Lives, isn't it? It's not that generic stuff I usually get. Boy. Wonderful. Sure is a great party. Yeah, I just want to eat all this up. Say, let's listen to a record of the Byrds now. You like the Byrds?
Record of bird. Yeah. What's that?
Blue-winged warbler. 1.
Where's that coming from?
2. 'Black-throated green warbler. 1.
They're in here somewhere. They're back here.
2. 3.
'Hello, lunch.
2. 'Parula warbler.
Hi. Am I too late for the party? Can I come in? Did I miss a party? Oh, please let me in.
What would you be when I say what I've done?
Oh, I'm exhausted. What a party. Oh.